This talk was given by Roshi Rafe Martin, guiding teacher of the Endless Path Zendo, a lay Buddhist community in Rochester, New York. Join our practice, in person or online, at endlesspathzendo.org.
So today is Saturday, February 3rd, 2024, and today we'll be looking at vows, and the vow of the Bodhisattva, the vow, our own vow, Zen practice vows, and how vows play out in life. As I said, Rose will be leaving on pilgrimage to India to follow the path of the Buddha in India, and this too is an expression of a very deep vow. Wordsworth wrote in the prelude, "My heart was full. I made no vows, but vows were then made for me." My heart was full. I made no vows, but vows were then made for me. We've all had that experience of things kind of gelling in our life from depths that we don't seem to be conscious of. It's not that we make this vow and I'm going to do this. It's that we find that we're living vows that come up from the deepest places in our hearts. So Roshi Kapleau used to say that vows are at the heart, the center, the core of every life. He would say the peach pit vows to become a peach, the egg to become a chicken, the child vows to become an adult. Adults vow to fulfill their commitments to family, to their talents, to ethical considerations, to work, to friendships, to the environment, to the nation, and to the planet. But ultimately, in the deepest sense, we all vow to realize awakened life as the fully conscious, compassionate beings known as Buddhas that we actually are, whether we know it or not. This vow, conscious or not, emerging from the fundamental aspiration of original nature to know itself, is what brings us to a zendo, to sesshin, zazenkai, doksan, the precepts. It may look like we're doing it all on our own, but at some point we may get an inkling that we're carried on a wind that begins much farther back. What is its origin? Where do vows begin? The Jataka tales, past life stories of the vow of the Bodhisattva to become a fully awakened Buddha, all follow in the Pali tradition from the story of a single vow so ancient as to be mythic, beyond literal time and space, yet informing both. This tale, which appears in the Dipankara, or traditional introduction to the Pali Jataka. It's a separate work, separate from the Jataka itself, but it serves as its introduction. It says that long ago, in a distant past world age, the Buddha Shakyamuni was a hermit sage named Sumeda. Meeting the Buddha Dipankara, the Buddha of that distant past time, he was so inspired that he vowed to also become a fully awakened Buddha and benefit all beings. This tale is central to the Jataka tradition. All the Jataka tales, the 547 in the Pali tradition, and the others scattered throughout Mahayana Sanskrit tradition and sutras and elsewhere, all follow from it. Each of the subsequent Jatakas is a demonstration of the steadfast effort it took for the Buddha to fulfill his vow. Mythically put, the Jatakas or past life stories of the Buddha take place in the millennia that unfold or unroll between that first vow and his arrival world ages later in the Tushita heavens, just before his birth as the prince Siddhartha Gautama, some 2,500 years ago in India. So a version of the tale drawn from traditional sources is what I'd like to read to you. It's the version that appears in an older book of mine, The Hungry Tigress, completely revised and expanded edition, Buddhist Myths, Tales, Legends, and Jataka Tales. So the story goes like this. 4 Asankaya kalpas and 100,000 world cycles ago, so that's quite a long time back. The Buddha, the future Buddha, the Buddha that is of our time, Shakyamuni Buddha, was born into a wealthy Brahmin family in the city of Amaravati. He was named Sumeda. The story goes that he was blessed with all goodness, physical beauty, intelligence, friendliness, kindness, ethics, morality. His parents died when he was still young, and as they went through, the stewards and whatever went through the list of all his inheritance, noting this much or so much from his mother, so much from his father, so much from his grandparents, so much from his great-parents, on and back and back. For 7 generations, the young man Sumeda began to think, my family has amassed wealth for 7 generations, yet neither my parents nor my grandparents nor any other of my ancestors were able to take any of it with them upon leaving this world. What is the point of amassing more? One day I too will die. As there is a road that leads beyond the sufferings of this world, should I just remain idle? No, I will leave this sheltered life and find that way. So he announced his intention to the king, gave away his money to the poor, and entered the forests and became a hermit. And there he lived on wild fruit and wore clothing of bark. This was kind of traditional for hermits of the time. His hair grew long, his beard grew long and matted, striving energetically, standing, sitting, or lying down. Looking deeply into his own mind, he gained profound insight. And for days he sat absorbed in the bliss of his freedom and knowledge, won by dint of his own effort. And now at this time, the Buddha Dipankara, surrounded by thousands of monks, nuns, lay people, was making his way to that city of Amaravati, and workers were busy smoothing and leveling the road in expectation of the great teacher's arrival. The hermit Sumeda, hearing about this, rose up into the air and flew over the forest and got to that road. That was the entrance to the city. And calling down to those working, he inquired, why are you laboring in the midday heat? Why is the road being leveled and strewn with golden sands? Why all these flowers and incense? And the workers replied, don't you know the Buddha Dipankara is approaching the city? He will give public talks and reveal his Dharma. And Sumeda's heart, just on its own, it leapt inside him for joy. A Buddha, he thought. Rare indeed is it to even hear that word, Buddha. Rare beyond all comprehension to actually meet, to encounter such a fully realized one. Said to be rarer than an Unambara flower, which only blossoms once every 1,000 years or something like that, to actually meet such a fully realized Buddha. So in our world cycle, that would have been Shakyamuni Buddha 2,500 years ago. Descending from the air, he could fly, obviously. He alighted beside the workers and he says, let me help you level the road for the Buddha Dipankara. And seeing that he was a person with supernatural powers, the foreman assigned him a stretch of low, swampy ground to fill. So with his heart pounding in expectation, his mind lit with joy, repeating over and over, a Buddha, a Buddha. Sumeda began filling in a stretch of low, swampy ground, the marshy ground with dry soil. Now, as he worked up ahead near the city, drums beat, trumpets sounded, flutes trilled, crowds called. Looking up, he saw banners swirling, flowers and jewels being tossed in the air. And at the center of all that commotion walked a calm figure, the Buddha Dipankara. And ancient texts say the Sumeda saw 6-hued rays of light extending from the Buddha. He saw a halo of golden light, wreaths of pulsing light like lightning rippling across a star-studded sky, encircling the Buddha. Devas, that is, beings of a higher realm, gods, they would be called in our typical mythological language, tossing flowers and were strumming instruments of gold, flying around, their exquisite music filling the air. So, Sumeda took this all in, and it struck him that this was someone who had attained all the powers of the mind, all the super knowledges, all wisdom, was entirely freed from all traces of greed, anger, self-centeredness, egotism. All goodness had been awakened and realized in this person's being. He just felt that. And he thought, I'll make an offering to the Buddha Dipankara for the sake of this Buddha knowledge, this kind of incredible wise goodness or good wiseness. Loosening his long hair, remember he was a hermit, sage in the Indian tradition at the time. He would have had a long beard and long hair, maybe tied up in a knot. He undid his long hair, and he spread his long hair and his bark cloth cloak in front of him in the mud. So he put himself down there, put his hair in the mud, took off his bark cloak, put it in the mud, because he hadn't finished filling in the swampy ground. And he thought, like the Buddha Dipankara, I too now want only to help all beings. How can I be content with mere personal liberation while others suffer? I am determined. Despite difficulties and dangers, I will never turn back. I am resolved to attain what the Buddha Dipankara has clearly attained, and I will benefit all beings. Then he lay down upon in the mud with the bark cloth cape and spread his long hair. And in this, he was making a dry passage for the Buddha to walk over this bit of muddy ground. So what was that? The story from English or British history of Sir Walter Raleigh, who put his cape down for Queen Elizabeth to walk over. It was that kind of moment, a moment of true humility before something greater. So the Buddha Dipankara is standing there by Sumeda's head, and looking down, he thought, this hermit has formed the resolution to become a Buddha. Will he be successful? And casting his mind far into the future, he saw that 4 Asankaya kalpas and 100,000 world cycles from that time, Sumeda would indeed become a fully realized, omniscient Buddha, an awakened one. His family name would be Gotama, and he would be the Buddha we know now, today. We're in this far future period from then, Shakyamuni Buddha. And standing there, surrounded by his disciples, the monks, nuns, men, women, children of all stations, beggar to king, the Buddha Dipankara made this prophecy. 4 Asankayas and 100,000 cycles from now, far, far in the future, the hermit lying here in the mud before us will fulfill his great vow. He will be a Buddha named Gotama. His birth will be in the city of Kapilavastu. His mother's name will be Maya, his father Suddhodana. His clan will be the Shakyas. When he is grown, he will see the 4 signs, old age, sickness, death, a monk, and he will leave this world, that is, clinging attachment to this world, meaning, the mind-created social structures that we all live within, built around so much acquisitiveness, self-centeredness, striving for goodness nonetheless. Of course, we have all kinds of laws that try to help us live well. Human beings keep trying, keep working at it, but he will leave all that and really focus on his own awareness and his own mind. And after great exertions, he will receive, when near death on the banks of the Naranjana River, a life-saving meal of milk rice. Then he will make his way to the foot of a Bodhi tree, seat himself there, and continuing his deep exertions to the uttermost, he will realize supreme Buddhahood. That is the potential of each living thing, to awaken fully to their own truly selfless, limitless mind, the mind of the universe itself. Lying in the mire, Sumeda became overwhelmed with joy. my deepest wish shall be attained, he thought. I shall be an awakened Buddha. And the crowd murmured, here is a Buddha shoot, a Buddha seed. We too shall make efforts, and if we should fail to attain the path of freedom in this life under the guidance of the Buddha Dipankara, well then, we shall surely succeed far in the future in the time of the Buddha Shakyamuni. And then the Buddha Dipankara praised the Bodhisattva and encouraged him, and accompanied by thousands of his disciples, departed. The Bodhisattva Sumeda arose and exclaimed, the words of a Buddha cannot fail. They are certain. Like an arrow which once shot from a bow must fall to earth, so too these words are destined to be fulfilled. I shall become a Buddha. He rose up from the mud, up again into the clear air, and flew back to his retreat in the Himalayas, where he remained steadfastly striving towards his ultimate goal. And that's where the Jataka tales begin. After that, every lifetime that's presented in the Jataka is a lifetime, ideally. Many Jatakas are simply recyclings of older Indian folklore and some monastic grumblings about temptations. So they don't live up to that ideal. But ideally, every Jataka is a way of showing the efforts the Buddha made to fulfill that great vow he had made as the hermit Sumeda. So to look at it, the vows of even beginner bodhisattvas like ourselves are not simply a wish. Rather, they're a heartfelt determination, a dedication. These are our great vows for all. They're not just add-ons. This is expressing the very core of the way of the Bodhisattva. This is what we've each vowed to do. At the end of every formal period of Zazen, we renew this vow publicly before the Buddha and before one another. We mean to do it. The decision to embody the Buddha way and become awakened Buddhas ourselves is such a demanding challenge that a vow is a practical necessity. That great iconoclast Zen master Ikkyu said, there is no natural Shakyamuni, which means no one simply drifts into fulfillment. Poet and translator Robert Bly, author of Iron John and one of the founders of the men's movement, in a workshop I attended years ago, which I've mentioned probably a number of times, said a wonderful thing. And it was funny too, but it was a great little statement. He said, if you just go with the flow, you always end up in the bleeping Gulf of Mexico. He's saying that maturing takes effort. So while Buddhist tradition asserts that all beings are already Buddhas, to be an awakened Buddha who can make use of the wisdom and compassion inherent to our own nature requires what Dogen called sustained exertion. This is not a forced, self-conscious effort. For lack of a better word, it's heartfelt. The carp in Zen leaps up against the flow of the waterfall to become the dragon it has always really been. Bodhisattva vows, like marriage vows, keep us steady. We may falter. At times we may come up short. We may fail, but if we do, we'll go down swinging. We mean what we say. When we start thinking, heck, this is good enough, or when doubts or fears assail us, our vow keeps us steady and honest. No, I'm not going to do that, we think. That's not my vow. The vow of the Bodhisattva or wisdom being distinguishes Mahayana or Great Way Zen from Buji Zen. It is a Zen that, while capable of calming and benefiting us, lacks motivation to benefit all. Yet the Lotus Sutra makes the revolutionary point that despite all seemingly short-sighted or lesser aspirations, Mahayana means literally great way, Zen, asserts that all beings are already on the path, the Buddha path of complete awakening, hence the name Great Way. It's the way that carries all. And this is so whether we consciously know it or not. Why? Because in reality, there is really only the one great path. Less profound, less real and complete ones are simply upaya, that is, skillful means pragmatically necessary, kind of illusions to help us keep going until we're ready for the whole deal. For the real aspiration of all beings is nothing less than Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, that is, full and perfect enlightenment, the enlightenment of a Buddha, which makes perfect sense, as Hakuin puts it in the Zazen Wasam. From the beginning, all beings are Buddha. It's ours from the start. We just don't know it. And because we don't know it, we make endless mistakes and sell ourselves and our world short time and time again. Hence our suffering world just as it is today. Buddhas who don't know they're Buddhas, causing so much pain, suffering, and harm. This was the core of the Buddha's great astonishment at the moment of complete enlightenment, leading him to exclaim in startled wonder, "All beings are already Buddhas, fully endowed with all wisdom and virtue. It's just that as their minds are clouded by self-centered delusion, they don't know it." If we accept that he wasn't a fool or a liar when he said this, then our vow begins with, I want to know what he's talking about. This doesn't really make much sense when I look around or look at myself. How could I be a Buddha? And eventually, it segues from, I want to know what he's talking about, to, I must and I will know what he meant. Because we each have this potential, how can we be satisfied every day in being less than we are? Aiken Roshi put new life into the old expression, divine discontent. That is our very awareness. Then we're less than what we really could be or really are. Sets in place a kind of divine discontent. It's the fuel of practice. And Aiken Roshi put it this way, not enough yet, not yet enough. So Jukai, that is ethical vows, the verse of the Kesa, or Raksu vows, great vows for all, the 4 vows, are all ways to help us actualize our fundamental vow to see through our own habitual self-centeredness. In time, we see that non-duality or intimacy is not philosophy, it's reality. Polluting the creek, we poison our own bloodstream. Breaking the branches of the maple tree, we compromise our own lungs. Once we begin seeing that dualistic views are upside down, we treat the world differently, not because we've been told to, or forced to, or because facts tell us that we should, but because we simply see and live in a different world, an intimate one. The world is my own body. Harming it, I harm myself. It's that simple and that clear. As our view changes, the world we live in changes. This is Heisenberg's indeterminacy principle in action. The presence of the observer changes what is observed. Blake wrote, "A fool sees not the same tree that a wise man sees." Zhao Chu, asked for the meaning of Bodhidharmas coming from the West, answered, "The oak tree in the front garden." Vows sustain us and open us to deepening practice. ongoing practice opens us to deepening vows, but it's never a given. We can choose to keep our vow at arm's length thinking, I'll get to that one day when I'm fully enlightened. Or we can commit to doing our best right now, just as we are. There's no need to wait for some better day or ideal time. Tomorrow is the day that never comes. Ideal times are an evasion. What about now? An old quote from Rabbi Hillel goes, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? And if not now, when? In the commentary on case 96 in the Hekiganroku Blue Cliff Record, Huan Wu imagines Wei Ke sitting in the snow outside Bodhidharma's cave thinking, when people of ancient times sought the way, they broke their bones and took out the marrow, shed their blood to appease hunger, spread their hair to cover mud, threw themselves off cliffs to feed tigers. Even of old they were like this. What about me? Spread their hair to cover mud. What about me? The simple act of actual practice now is how we fulfill the hope of one day. Whenever we sit down and practice, the vow comes alive, and the day is now. All the stuff now on our plate, work, family, friendships, obligations, commitments, desires, etc., are themselves expressions of our vows, the context of our own maturing. The challenges we may face in life are not obstacles to our vows, but rather opportunities to fulfill them. To try to escape from our circumstances in order to practice would be like jumping from the frying pan into the fire. It misses the point. Which does not mean that if things aren't right, we shouldn't do all we can to change them. Karma is not destiny, and it's not fate. In the past life Jataka tales, the Buddha was often not an ordained or monastic practitioner, fully in it. He was a parent, a merchant, a gymnast, a king, a sage, a prince, a soldier, an archer, a trader, a caravan leader, even a thief, or not even human at all, but a tree, a horse, a dog, an elephant, and so on. All were equally expressions of his vow, and all equally the path of his maturing that vow. The legendary meeting of the hermit Sumeda and the Buddha Dipankara, while the formal opening of the Jatakas doesn't present the Buddha to be's first lifetime of practice, for in the story he's already quite advanced, so free, he can literally fly. But it's only with the vow that he becomes the Bodhisattva, fully committed to working not just for personal gains or powers, but selflessly for the benefit of all. Despite his spiritual accomplishments, he sees that his practice has been lacking in compassion and wisdom. Zen sometimes calls this kind of practice a mud ball. That is, it looks like something you can use to bounce or throw, but it leaves messy stains on your hands and clothing, and when you throw it, it just falls apart. It doesn't do the job. It's been mudball practice, no matter how advanced he's become. The Buddha, as the hermit Sumeda, was a long-haired Indian sage or rishi, a spiritually accomplished person with special powers or siddhis, S-I-D-D-H-I-S. But when he met the fully awakened Buddha Dipankara, for the first time he saw that he'd missed the point. Well, he'd gained personal powers and peace, and had a degree, a very deep degree perhaps, of enlightenment, and could enter nirvana at life's end, inspired by the truly selfless example of the Buddha Dipankara. He then spontaneously vows to develop all the potential powers of mind for wisdom and goodness, so he can ultimately, and no matter how long it takes to get there, ultimately benefit all living things. And this is when the real work of waking beyond habitual self-centeredness at last begins for the person we come to know in our time period as the Buddha Shakyamuni. And this happened, as it said, hundreds and thousands and millions of lifetimes in the past. It's a great metaphor, whether you accept lifetimes literally or not. In short, instead of trying to gain more for himself or become somehow special through his practice, he becomes what we recognize simply as a practicing Buddhist, someone putting their aspiration toward a genuinely selfless and compassionate life dedicated to the welfare of all into daily practice. Hakuin wrote, even if you're able to enter the gate of non-duality, that is, have some degree of insight, realization of the non-dual, if you lack the Bodhi mind, this mind dedicated to the welfare of all, you'll end up under Mara's sway. Mara, of course, is the Buddhist tempter, the Buddhist devil. Anyone who wants to achieve complete mastery of the Dharma has to spur forward the wheel of the four great universal vows, the great vows for all. Has to spur forward the wheel of the four great universal vows. These are the vows of a Bodhisattva. Dogen, in the section of the Shobogenzo titled Valley Sounds, Mountain Colors, wrote, as soon as you rouse the aspiration for enlightenment, even if you transmigrate, in the 6 realms and 4 forms of birth, transmigration will be your vow for enlightenment. Although you may have wasted time so far, you should vow immediately before this life ends, together with all sentient beings, may I hear the true Dharma from this birth throughout future births. When I hear the true Dharma, I will not doubt or distrust it. When I encounter true Dharma, I will relinquish ordinary affairs, that is, my clinging to or attachment to self-centered affairs, and uphold the Buddha Dharma. Thus, may I realize the way together with the great earth and all sentient beings. This vow is the ground, says Dogen, for genuine aspiration. Do not slacken in this determination. Yamada Koan, who became Yamada Koan Roshi, shortly after his own deep initial enlightenment, in a letter to Yasutani Roshi that's presented in the 3 Pillars of Zen, wrote, that American was asking, he's speaking about Philip Kapleau, whether it is possible to attain enlightenment in 1 week of sesshin. Tell him this for me. Don't say days, weeks, years, or even lifetimes. Don't say millions or billions of kalpas. Tell him to vow to attain enlightenment, though it takes the infinite, the boundless, the incalculable future. Tell him to vow to attain enlightenment. And by that he means full enlightenment, the complete realization of all the mind's potential wisdom and goodness for the sake of all. Tell him to vow to attain that, though it takes the incalculable future. Don't limit it to days, weeks, months, years, or even kalpas or billions of kalpas. This is what we see actualized in the great vow of the Bodhisattva. But to actualize our vow, we focus on the count, the breath, the koan, returning to our practice whenever attention strays. According to Mahayana, Great Way Buddhism, The fundamental vow of all living beings is to awaken for the benefit of all. Practicing realization, we are actualizing what is already at our core. Again, the Lotus Sutra's great revelation is that despite whatever we may think our aspiration is, in reality, all beings, ourselves included, are already on the great way. In reality, there are no lesser vehicles such as that of Arhat or Pratika Buddha or Hinayana practitioner, or those who seek only personal benefit, or those who want to get to heavens, or individual personal nirvanas. What all beings truly seek deep, deep down is complete fulfillment, complete Buddhahood. With the first emergence of life from the first bacteria on, the first amoeba on, this vow, this innate yearning for wholeness and completion, an impulse to benefit all beings who are astonishingly equally one's own real self, was already in play. Through daily zazen, attendance teisho ceremony doksan, participation in zazen kaisashin and jukai, we share in the Buddha's commitment to actualize our aspiration toward wholeness. This is how we set our hair down in the mud to let a Buddha walk over. The introduction to the Pali Jataka serves as a kind of pilot episode for the series of 547 such tales, a long-running series indeed, which we know as the Jataka proper. The Jataka of Sumeda and Dipankara Buddha repeats the old maxim that genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. An initial inspiration is actualized by the ongoing work that follows. A single vow becomes countless jatakas. Through effort, the genius of our nature reveals itself, and yet I made no vows, yet vows were then made for me, as Wordsworth realized. It is not a matter of will. That comes afterward, in the living and the testing of it. But the vow initially arises spontaneously and mysteriously, rising up from unknown depths in ourselves. No one can say why or when, but at some point that vow arises in us. Maybe not in so many words, but that aspiration is there to really be whole, to really be complete. The story plants seeds of faith in karma, or cause and effect, in effort, perseverance, aspiration, and determination, and has its touch of ancient realism too, when the crowd responds not just with joy, but genuine relief, when the Buddha Dipankara predicts Sumeda's eventual Buddhahood as the Buddha Shakyamuni, far, hundreds of millions of asankaya kalpas in the future. Whew, they exclaimed. If we don't make the grade now with the Buddha Dipankara, we'll have another chance under the guidance of the Buddha Shakyamuni, in the far future. Maybe we ourselves were in that crowd long ago. Here's our chance. Come round again. The Buddha, as the sage Sumeda millennia ago, saw what it was he really wanted and made a vow to realize it. After that, all that was required was that he just keep going and not give up or fade away. Our practice today arises from this same vow, this same realization and commitment. But who vows the vow? The second koan in the gateless barrier, Wumen koan, is Baizhang and the fox, and it includes this teacher-student encounter. Wang Po stepped forward and asked. The old man failed to give the correct turning words and was made to live as a fox for 500 lives, you say. If, however, his answer had not been incorrect each time, what would he have become? Bai Chong said, just step up here closer and I'll tell you. Wang Bo went up to Bai Chong and slapped him in the face. Bai Chong clapped his hands and laughed, saying, I thought the barbarian had a red beard, but here's a red-bearded barbarian. For our current purposes, we might ask, is the vow then only realized at the end of a lengthy sequence of 500 lives? Interestingly, about the same number as the number of tales in the Pali Jataka collection. But what about now? Where's the vow now? An introductory koan drawn from the Diamond Sutra says, as you practice Zen on the upward path, each step is equal in value. Why? What makes each step equal in value? Can you say? As to how to realize truth, Zen Master Dogen at the opening of section 10 of the Shobogenzo, the eye of the treasury of the true Dharma, titled Valley Sounds, Mountain Colors, writes, embody in yourself the dedication of a boy spreading his hair on muddy ground for a Buddha to walk on. Embody in yourself the dedication of a boy spreading his hair on muddy ground for a Buddha to walk on. Obviously, he's referencing the introduction to the Pali Jataka. Some people think that Jataka tales are not part of Zen, but I say, look again. Hakuin, Wumen, Dogen all reference them, as do other teachers of the past. In one of his late poems titled The Circus Animal's Desertion, W.B. Yeats wrote, I must lie down where all the ladders start, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. I must lie down where all the ladders start, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. To build a building, we start with the basement and foundations, not the top floor. We put our long hair of endless self-involvement down in the mud for a Buddha to walk over. It is an act of acceptance and deepest humility. The Diamond Sutra says that if we look for the Tathagata through form and color, we're going the wrong way. We'll not see the Tathagata. How then will you meet the Tathagata? How do we meet the living Buddha face to face and receive confirmation of eventual Buddhahood? Should we look for someone surrounded by glowing lights and followed by admiring crowds? Indeed, should we even expect someone at all? Why not something or even nothing? Focusing on the practice of the practice of just this breath, of hu or mu or other koan, is dropping our long hair in the mud. In time, the wall walks over, the floor walks over, the clink of a spoon against a cup comes across, the colors of a leaf enter fully. Devotedly continuing on, we disappear into the practice. Dogen's core point in the Genjo Koan section of Shobogenzo remains: to study the way is to study the self. To study the self, this thing that we take so for granted, we don't even look at it. To study the way is to study the self. Who is it that's practicing? Who is it that sees color with the eyes, that hears sounds with the ears, that goes through all the difficulties of a life? To study the self, to really look into this, is to forget the self. I can't find any unpeace of mind, because I can't find my mind, said Waco de Bodhidharma. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be realized by all things. Such selfless practice continues endlessly. If we live and practice as Dogen says, embodying such dedication, we won't need special predictions. Confirmation of Buddhahood is this breath, this raindrop, this flower, this morning star, this painful knee, this itchy nose, this unexpected confusing thought, just as it is. When asked for the highest teaching of the Bodhidharma, Xiang Lin answered, sitting long, getting tired. Dogen writes in Shobogenzu Juki, or confirmation, there is not a single thing that is not confirmation. And confirmation is the coming and going of birth and death. Confirmation is the entire world of the 10 directions. And most wonderfully, he said, or wrote, confirmation causes all things to be as they are. Confirmation of Buddhahood, such as Sumeda received, causes all things to be just as they are. The outcome's already in the bag. From the beginning, all beings are Buddha. We can't miss it any more than we miss the ground. With the stamp of our foot, we've made the vow. We are the vow. Everything that happens now, every challenge, is another opportunity to deepen and mature. Each is a Jataka tale of the as yet unfully awakened Buddha. We are. At the end of formal periods of Zazen, we recite great vows for all, look at the Buddha on the altar, and make our vows. In doing this, we reenact that anciently timeless moment when the Buddha in a distant past life first saw a realized Buddha and vowed, I want to be like you, and become a fully awakened Buddha able to help all beings. Releasing self-centered thoughts, realizing the count, the breath, the koan, the who is hearing, inquiry, our own silent, fathomless, selfless zazening, is this vow itself vowing. In the process, we become nothing special, simply ordinary Buddhists endlessly practicing. Somewhere in his writings, the Dalai Lama relates that 2,500 years ago, when the Buddha was teaching in India, he himself was most likely an untouchable, the lowest of the low, standing at the edge of the crowd, hearing the Buddha's words and seeing his presence. Back then, he was moved to faith in the truth of what the Buddha presented and began devotedly practicing. We begin as we are, where we are. Let us now turn, face the Buddha, and make our vows.